It's funny is that when Chinese factory workers try and jump off bridges and they try and jump off the roofs of their factories because they're being driven so fucking insane from the work environments in these factories, everybody goes completely mental. And then we don't lecture all of the other factory workers. We say, well, there's something really wrong with that system. It's the people in charge of those factories and the consumers who are to blame. We don't blame the factory workers, right? What happens when kids in government schools hang themselves in their closets, jump off bridges, OD, shoot themselves, throw themselves in front of trains because they cannot stand the government environment that they're forced to be in? Well, what do? We lecture other children not to bully them, you see. We have anti-bullying campaigns, which is exactly the same as saying to the factory workers in the overseas factories, you all just should be nicer to each other. That's the only problem. Just be nicer to each other. In other words, we're blaming the other inhabitants, the other slaves in the factory system for the fact that some people are jumping off bridges rather than go back to work. And do you understand why these kids are killing themselves? They're killing themselves so they don't have to go back to government schools. It is a fundamental protest. You remember this Tibetan monk protesting the war? Set himself on fire, his famous picture. These kids are killing themselves so that they do not have to go back to government schools. And what do we say? Well, the problem, you see, is that other children aren't nice enough to them. It's like blaming the suicides of the factory workers on the other factory workers. We would never imagine doing that. Imagine writing that article. Suicides in Chinese factories. Well, the problem is that the other factory workers are mean to these people and don't support them enough. I mean, you would be viewed as just horrendous, but we trap children in these government fucking hellholes. And then when they kill themselves out of protest for having to go back, and it's always school, isn't it? It's always school. They don't kill themselves because they have to go back to Boy Scouts. They don't kill themselves because their Xbox crashed. They don't kill themselves because the Krispy Kremes are out of donuts. They kill themselves because they don't want to go back to government schools.
a programmed in belief, the whole belief in authority. I mean, that's what school does. Never mind reading and writing and arithmetic and the things it pretends to teach. What school teaches children is if you obey, you're good. If you disobey, you're bad. If you obey, you're good. If you disobey, you're bad. That's the message that comes through everything. And when they come out of school, they have no idea how to be human beings. The first thing they do is look around and say, who's in charge of me? They can't
Right.
fathom the idea that they're in charge of themselves. They really can't.
Yeah. I remember when I was in school, what I remember was the best strategy to be successful, and I was pretty successful academically in school. The best strategy was just paraphrasing what the teacher or the professor or the school book said. It wasn't
Yep.
thinking for yourself, it was paraphrasing.
Yep, I got good grades for a long time. I was near the top of my class, and it didn't occur to me till a lot later what a huge, ridiculous joke the whole thing is. But that's the message that, you know, nobody thinks that's what they're teaching. But if you look at the environment, I mean, these are somebody's most formative years. He spends most of it sitting in a room where they don't have to tell him these things. He experiences it. He learns that there are two classes of people, the masters and the subjects. They're the subjects, the teachers are the masters. You talk when the master says it's okay. You do what the master tells you to do. You don't do anything else. If you want to do anything, you ask the master. If he says no, you're out of luck. If he says yes, and by his good graces allows you to do something, you grovel and say, oh, thank you, master. And it's just, school is one giant example of how to live your life in a prison. And then you step out the doors and people think, all right, where's the next prison warden? Like, who am I beholden to now?
It is exactly what I mean. There's a sort of vivid scene in Pink Floyd's The Wall, where the children who are faceless are in school and they are sort of marching along this conveyor belt and dropping into this meat grinder, and out they come as this undifferentiated sort of paste or sausage meat. Mentally, he's bang on. Mentally, this is exactly what occurs within school. You come in as a wonderful, curious, free-thinking, imaginative, logical child, because children are wonderfully logical and curious and enjoy learning to use their minds just as they enjoy learning to use their bodies. They go into school, public education in particular, but private education as well. They go into school and their brains are simply pulverized. Their brains are simply turned into pate. And it is gruesome. I mean, it is completely gruesome. If they did to their bodies what they did to their minds, they would all come out looking like people in advanced stages of multiple sclerosis. In fact, it would be even worse because the bodies would still be surviving in some crippled manner, whereas people's brains coming out of public school are just completely destroyed. they didn't ask me if I wanted to be there.
No.
They didn't ask me what kind of education I wanted. Did I want self-study? Did I want to be in a group? They didn't ask me until later on, until I was in my mid-teens, what courses, and even some of those were required.
Because that's irrelevant.
They didn't ask me if, hey, is it okay to finish doing what you're doing and move on to something else, or do you want to finish what you're doing? You got this bell that goes off every 45 or 50 minutes. It just jars you right out of whatever you're doing. It drags you off to the next room, or the next room comes to you. And I mean, it's crazy. And I go buy a slice of pizza and I get 3 little things saying, hey, how was your pizza? How did you like the store? Was it a good price? There's so much feedback from something as unimportant as a pizza slice, but the actual education of children, I mean, if they say they care about children, how about actually asking the children? I mean, doesn't mean you have to take what the children say as an absolute, but how can they claim to care about the kids if they never consult the kids? I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Because 65% of children with ADHD exhibit performance in defiance or problems with authority figures. Problems with authority figures, can you imagine? Because the teachers in public school are so wonderful and so voluntary and so concerned with the children and so demonstrative of the value of voluntarism and peaceful interactions, because they, of course, are fed with the blood-soaked state money from coercive taxation. So they're modeling the effects of aggressive and coercive behavior. And strangely enough, when the children do that, when the children use aggression to get what they want, unlike the public school teachers with their salaries and benefits and 2 months off in the summer, they don't use aggression to get what they want, of course not. When children do it, it's wrong and it's bad. And it must be medicated and drugged. This is the one thing that society really doesn't like about children, is that children will hold up a mirror to who you actually are. Who you actually are. They're not trained into pretending that you aren't who you are in the way that adults are. So children will reflect back to society what society is really doing. And children are smart enough now to know, to get to understand in their gut that their entire system is run on coercion and control and indoctrination and dominance and humiliation and aggression. And they act that out. They model that out. And then, of course, we see that mirror held up to ourselves and we're like, oh my God, that's terrible. Let's drug it. Let's control it. Let's crush it. It really fundamentally comes down to one 4-letter word, which is love. Love. We need to love our children enough to take on this crippling statist, coercive monopoly that currently has its primordial chained fist around the necks and minds and souls of our children. This is not a system that was designed. This was a system that was inherited from Prussians. And of course, the Prussians did a wonderful job of keeping the German children peaceful in the 19th and 20th century. We have to love our children enough. We have to love our children enough to stand up to this crazy, insane, coercive, destructive system. Because right now, children's brains are expanding beyond the ancient, ridiculous skull of government-run schooling. Our children are too smart to sit in rows and vegetate while being indoctrinated. They're too smart. They need to be out in the world. They need to be engaged. They need to be curious. They need to not be drugged like Soviet-era, quote, mental health patients, because they fundamentally don't like the bullying of this destructive system. We need to stop doing that. We need to stand up against these special interests and save our children from this ridiculous and destructive and brain-destroying system. And then our children will respect us. But until we do that, we can drug them all we want, but they still see exactly how society is run.
it's not your kid alone who is taken into this cult for 14 years. It is everybody's kid. Oh, and by the way, you were also taken into this cult, and so was your grandfather, and so was your great-grandfather, and so was your great-great-grandfather. And so is everybody else in the society that you deal with. And anybody who's really educated had exposure to another 4 to 8 years of an even worse cult. Right? The only way that they could get a degree was to go into an even more deranged and insane cult, but it was the only way they could get ahead in the world was to be further indoctrinated for another 4 to 8 years. So sort of in toto, you have 18 to 22 years of brainwashing, straight. And then people look at Americans, and this is true for just about every what I call culture, which is sort of the brain damage or scar tissue of heavily indoctrinated and punished and encouraged falsehoods. That the people look at Americans who've spent 14 to 18 to 22 years being brainwashed and say, well, isn't it weird that Americans believe this, or isn't it weird that Americans believe that? I just find that's ridiculous and completely non-empathetic, and worse. You might as well be a fist-pumping, flag-waving, mindless patriot. To be that would be far better for the freedom movement than for people to write books saying, well, America's kind of bad, and one of the roots of America's badness is the fact that the American people believe this, that, or the other. Because you completely discredit any honest criticism of the way things are, because you're blaming people for brainwashing. So, the important thing when you're talking about education with people is that they not have any illusions about the nature of state education as it stands at the moment, that it is just a complete shredder of the mind and destroyer of the personality, and it is a producer of slaves. And again, it's not because all the teachers are evil, it's just the natural logic of the system, which we'll get into perhaps this afternoon. And so when you're thinking about the French or Americans or British and saying, oh, they're like this or they're like that, it's like it's not true at all. We have no idea what people are like. We have no idea what the human soul looks like in the absence of brutal coercion, because there's simply no human being in the world who grows up who is not subject to brutal coercion all of their lives. And we know that because there's such a thing as organized religion, and there's such a thing as the state, and there's such a thing as public education.
And there are lots of smart people out there who will point all of this nonsense out. So the best thing the ruling class can do is to co-opt, to incorporate any intelligent people into their paradigm. And the way they do that is by giving them benefits. So you get professors with, months off in the summer and sabbaticals, and they can't be fired, and they work a couple of hours a week and so on. And you have public school teachers who can't be fired and get summers off and all that. And in exchange for allegiance to the ruling classes, it's a new kind of priesthood. They have to inflict indoctrination on the children. So the system is working perfectly. The ruling class does not want intelligent voters. They don't want people to ask any intelligent questions. They don't want people to examine any of the moral roots of the society they live in. So I think it's a wildly successful program. It indoctrinates the children, and it ensures the allegiance of any intellectual classes. So hats off to the evil meisters. They have done a fine job.
Yeah, I mean, so the things that pop into my mind, right? So if I heard this and I was your average statist, then a whole bunch of things would pop into my mind. First of all, I would say, oh, so you're basically saying I can't think. I don't know how to think because I went to government schools. And so you're saying I've been indoctrinated. I don't know what the hell's going on. So I'd be upset and offended at that because you see, offense is so much easier than thinking. right? So if people can get offended that they don't have to analyze anything, they don't have to review anything, they don't have to look at any facts, they can just substitute offense for argument. It's an ad hominem against the argument itself. It just allows people to avoid. And so if people get offended when you say that state schooling is indoctrination, that actually confirms the thesis, because offense is what you are trained into when you're indoctrinated. You're trained to be angry, offended, and upset by particular questions or perspectives, and that is a complete example of indoctrination. So people who will get offended by that are only confirming the diagnosis of indoctrination. So that would be one. The second thing would be, okay, so my parents put me into these terrible schools and praised them the whole time, and my aunt is a teacher, and you saying that these people are all somehow enmeshed in some monstrous plan to indoctrinate children for the sake of our reptilian lizard masters or something, and so they'd feel bad about that. And, of course, if they themselves have children, then they've put those children into these government schools, they feel bad about that. Because if they accept your argument, what are they going to do? Well, they have to pull their kids out of government schools, or they have to start teaching them about some actual truths in the world, which is going to cause them to run into lots of conflicts with their teachers and perhaps their children with other people's children, and so on. And so they just kind of want to dodge and avoid that. And, of course, government schools are daycares. I mean, they're prisons in a way, and they're daycares in a way, because it allows, I mean, obviously inconveniently, but it allows parents to drop their kids off and then go to work where they can pay taxes and feed the beast called the state. And so people have structured their lives around, well, my kids go to school. And then there's a daycare tacked onto the end of the school day, so I'll drop them off at 7:30 in the morning, and I'll pick them up at 6:30 at night. And that's the way I've structured my life. And I've bought a house and have a mortgage payment and a car payment based upon all that kind of crap. And so if you're telling me that I'm actually doing harm by my children to put them in daycare, to put them in government schools, then I'm going to have to change my life significantly, and that's going to bring me into conflict with other people. So I'm going to sit there and have to go to my aunt, and my aunt's going to say, oh, I hear that my aunt who's the teacher is going to say, oh, I hear you pulled your kids out of school. Why is that? Have you become some fundamentalist Christian, and is it too secular for you? You'd be like, no, it's because it's funded on coercion and based on indoctrination. What are you saying? Says your auntie. Are you saying that I have somehow been doing harm to these wonderful children who I love so much and would lay down my life for, to educate them properly and bring them up as wise, caring, virtuous citizens? Yes, exactly. I mean, this is the Thanksgiving dinners that you can look forward to if you accept this argument. And your children, of course, you're going to have to say to your kids, listen, we're pulling you out of school. Why are you pulling us out of school? Well, it turns out it's an indoctrination farm. Oh, really? I quite like it there. My friends are all there. I don't want to leave. Blah, right? So you got to quit your job. You got to move out of your house. You got to go from two cars down to one car. You got endless conflicts with your family, and your kids don't want to be pulled out of school because that's all they've known. Plus, you have to apologize them for the harm that the school has done to their brains, which you've supported before. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So you stack all of that stuff up against. That's what people hear, and that's what the dominoes that go off in their brain when they hear government schools are bad.
Yeah, I mean, it bothers the shit out of me when teachers say that they're underpaid.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay, great. Then let's privatize the schools and you can get all the money and all the value that the children and their parents voluntarily want to give you. Because if the government's underpaying you, let's release you into the free market so you can get your full amount of money's worth. Like if Brad Pitt is in the Soviet theater troupe and he feels he's underpaid, I got it. Let's open it up to the free market and you go make $10 or $20 million film. If you're Tom Cruise in the back end of the chorus line in an off-Broadway production because it's being run by the government, I get it. You're underpaid. You could be an action hero with abs to die for. Let's release you into the free market and you can make $10 or $20 million a film. And teachers say, we're underpaid. I'm like, great. Let's get you out into the free market so you can make all that money you feel that you deserve because you're such great teachers. Let's unshackle you from this horrible price ceiling called the government and set you free into the free market so you can go and scoop all of the money out of the grateful parents' pockets for the massive amount of beneficial brain cells you're dropping into their children's craniums. And they're like, what, free market? Fuck no. I don't want to go. No. God, no, don't put me out there. I'll discover my true worth. No! Now, one of the main problems with violence as an institution is that it freezes situations in time. Once the free market, once voluntarism, once choice is no longer part of the interaction, the social institution is frozen in time. It no longer adapts. It no longer progresses in any fundamental way. What's the proof? Well, what was the educational environment in the mid to late 19th century when government education landed like an asteroid on the skull of a T-Rex on education? Well, you had usually a woman, or you had a teacher, you had a room, you had rows and rows of chairs, you had a blackboard, and you had chalk. And that was how education was provided. Fast forward about 150 years or so, what is the environment? Oh, look, it is a room, a rows of chairs, a teacher, a blackboard, and chalk. It's insane when you think about it, how much has changed in every other field of private endeavor, from cars to airplanes to the internet to everything that you can imagine in the free market has changed and progressed to the point where you simply can't find technology from the 1860s and 1870s in use today. Look at farming. It would be like going back to scythes. No, we have giant combine harvesters now. I mean, it's completely insane. Once you wrap the coercion of the state around an institution, that institution gets frozen in time and no longer progresses. So we are basically educating our children in an environment that was developed 150 years ago and has barely changed since, despite the amazing and immense changes in almost every other field of human endeavor. school is creepily neutral about the meat and juice in life. And the reason for that is, you really can't get into, does God exist? You can't really get into how should society be structured. You can't really get into what is virtue, what is truth. I mean, the things that I think are actually really valuable for people to live good, meaningful, and hopefully moral lives. And the reason you can't is because Muslims can't have their own schools, Christians can't have their own schools, atheists can't have their own schools, and then you end up having to jam everyone with different belief systems into an environment. And then what happens is you can't talk about anything meaningful, because no matter who you please, there's going to be lots more people that you're going to offend and upset.
Right.
And I think not wanting hordes of angry parents saying, what are you teaching my children? They have to make it really almost purposefully as bland as possible. And that's my main memory from school is just boredom. Just feeling like I was just like a conveyor belt of dry data was being shoveled into my brain, which had no use and no value and no purpose,
right,
and no tying to any sort of larger thing. Now, I mean, as an adult, I'm ravenous about, I think this is quite common. The people who tend to be most curious and intellectually driven as adults were usually mediocre students who were completely bored in school, and that break out of the prison kind of thing is important, because when you're home you can teach your kids real values, but in school, if you're a teacher who tries that, I think you get into, almost no matter what values you teach, you're just going to get into trouble.
When I was a boy in school, female teachers mostly, and male teachers to some degree, they all were annoyed at me because I didn't do my homework, because I didn't apply myself. I was lazy. If effort matched ability, Mr. Molyneux, you'd be an A+. Nobody asked me why I wasn't applying myself. I had a physics test one week when I was 14 or so, science test. And I was studying, and then my mom leaned up against some crappy-ass tin shelf that we had, and it fell on me. Books and papers and all that. My mom was hysterical. I had to fix it up, calm her down. Took an hour or two. Studied a little more, got a little panic because I needed to get some sleep. And my mom, I had a typewriter in my room because I used to write stories even when I was a kid. I wrote my first novel when I was like, oh gosh, 14. And my mom was writing some obsessive letter to some lawyer about some doctor, and she was up most of the night smoking like a chimney, and the rat-tat-tat-tat of the keyboard from an electric typewriter would regularly wake me up. Dragged my ass out of bed. Didn't do well on the test, barely passed. Got it tossed on my desk with this sneer of contempt from the teacher. Not a very good showing. Of course, nobody asked. I mean, the idea that we would, the possibility that we might inquire as to why a boy might not be applying himself, well, it's incomprehensible. We just insult him. We just say that he's equal to everybody else in opportunity and home life and security and stability, and simply attack him then for his laziness. But the idea that any of the hundreds of teachers that I had throughout various countries and various schools when I was a kid, the idea that any of them would ask me why I was not applying myself, why I rarely did homework, why I was not keeping up. That would be to inquire as to my inner life and my motivations and my circumstances and my environment. Who the hell wants to do that? Jesus, you find out about that, you might have to fucking do something about some poor kid in a terrible situation. No, 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 no. You lazy. You lazy white boy.
I mean, I have been running my show a little longer than half the time most people spend in government schools. Every course you could imagine is available online from the very best teachers from the very Ivy League schools. There's that end of the spectrum, and then there's me in a car, right? So there's everything out there for you to learn whatever you need, whatever you want. So the idea that we need all of this formal structure in order to learn, grades and tests are antithetical to learning. Homework is antithetical to learning. Summers off are antithetical to learning. Hey, you got a really big, important operation, doctor. Go on vacation for 2 months, then do it. No, I think practice makes perfect. You don't take 2 months off from anything and expect to be as good at it when you come back. Putting children segregated by age is antithetical to learning, and it's antithetical to the development of empathy.
Really? I never thought about that.
The development of empathy has a lot to do with children of different ages being together, which is the Waldorf school approach. Because if you get kids of the same age, what are they? They're competitive, right? Competition is a fine thing. Don't get me wrong. I want to be the best at what I do. But competition does not foster empathy. Competition can help foster excellence, and excellence is an important part of life, but doesn't really foster empathy. What fosters empathy is, oh, here, I was helped with this by some older kid. Let me help you, younger kid. Let me be your mentor. Let me help you. Let me find out if I know this by trying to explain it to someone who's 2 years younger than me, right? If I think that I know long division, let me try explaining it to someone who's 6. That's how I know if I really know it. You know, there's various magic pixie dusts that people throw around instead of actually trying to solve problems in society. Education is one of them. It's like, if we just get more education, we'll just be a better, greater society. And my goodness, I mean, all the people who blew up the economy had incredibly advanced degrees and incredibly high education. All the people who started the war in Iraq had incredibly advanced degrees and very high education. So to me, it just all seems nonsense, this idea that somehow education is going to make us a better society, and people should definitely be looking into alternatives.
As I've mentioned before in this show, I had a teacher who said to me once, wrote it down in my yearbook, Stefan Molyneux, if effort matched ability, you'd be an A+. Oh, you're just lazy. Nothing wrong with your environment. Nothing wrong with my teaching. Nothing wrong with the content. Nothing wrong with the world. Nothing wrong with the fact that you're forced to be here. Nothing wrong with the fact that your parents are forced to pay for it. Nothing wrong with the fact that the class is disruptive. Nothing wrong with the fact that half the kids are drugged. Nothing wrong with any of that. You just lack motivation.
I've like 95%
I mean,
of all the teachers I've had.
Oh, and they suck.
They do suck.
Teachers suck.
Yeah.
They suck the very life ambition. I mean, if they could get their fucking proboscis into your bone marrow, they'd take that too. They suck in just ways that can't possibly be explained to the future. Let me tell the future just how much public school teachers suck. They can't tell you why they're teaching you anything. They can't tell you how it's relevant. They can't tell you why it's important. They can't explain it to ways in which you understand. They can't tell you how you're going to use this knowledge in the future. They can't tell you how to think. They can't tell you anything about ethics. They can't teach you anything about philosophy. They can't teach you anything about empiricism. They're boring. They're droners. They're petty. They're vicious. They're control freaks. They're backward. They're retrograde. It's like some little space-time portal opened up from the asshole of the Prussian Empire and dumped all of these cluster fracks on children. I didn't even have one good teacher, and I was schooled in 3 continents by probably 100 or 200 of them. I mean, kids love to learn. They take an incredible joy out of learning. They're hungry, thirsty for the world. To make children bored of learning is like making Pavarotti bored of cheesecake. It's like making teenage boys bored of sex. It's like making teenage girls bored of gossip and cattiness. It's not easy to scrub the wonder and joy and curiosity out of children's souls. Oh, but they do it. Oh, they get them into a corner and they drone at them about inconsequential things. And they dart back and punish them for thinking for themselves or speaking out of turn. Oh, I have to go to the washroom. Can I put my hand up? Fuck. Even cattle can pee where they stand. Fuck. You don't have to ask permission to go to the washroom in jail, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
Asked some friends of ours how their kid was enjoying school. You know what the kid liked most? The school bus and recess. In other words, everything that wasn't school was okay with her. Everything that didn't involve sitting there like a saggy-ass turnip rotting in the sun. Oh, wait, I can't even use a sun metaphor in the school. Rotting in the damp, cloying, statist rain. I mean, it is as easy to scrub joy out of children as it is to get them to stop running everywhere, which is not something you really want to do. But they do it. Those leechy statist vampires from hell, oh, they managed to do it. And then do you know what we say to the children who've had their joy and their blood sucked dry by dismal teachers in a boring system, in a pointless environment, in a prison-like school? Do you know what we say to them? You lack motivation, don't you, sweetie? I guess you're just a little bit lazy now, aren't you? Oh, I think you're going to have to stay late because you weren't listening to teacher. Oh, did you walk out of the movie that was boring? I'm sorry, you have to go back in, pay 3 times and watch it 5 times now. If you have any problem with the government schools, you are the problem. Because that's how much we love our children, you see. That's how much we care for the next generation. Laden them down with debt, drug them, inflict heavily praised single families on them, stuff them in brain-dead schools where you have to have metal detectors because you're afraid of people sticking shivs into each other. Or they're so bored they're fucking sticking shivs into themselves just for some stimulation. You know, might as well go to a concentration camp and say, you people aren't really motivated for this work, are you? What's the matter with you? We give you rations, a place to sleep. Why aren't you working harder? You must be lazy. Can we get out of here? No!
generally the best teachers are the ones who get chased out by the unions. I don't know if you ever saw a film called Stand and Deliver about an outstanding teacher in America. Well, he quit in frustration. John Taylor Gatto, voted the best teacher in New York State, quit in horrifying frustration. Read The Bee Eater about Michelle Rhee, who tried to take on an incredibly corrupt and vile teachers union and couldn't, like, she had a proposal that said, listen, if you're a good teacher, like currently you're making like 60, 70K. If you're a good teacher, you'll make 125, 150. If your students do well, if you get good responses, you'll make a shit ton of money. But and all we want in return for that is that if you're shitty and your students hate you and they learn nothing, we'll fire you. Right? If you do really well, you'll make a fortune. And if the students hate you and they learn nothing, you'll be fired. That's not radical to me. That's basic market value. And that's how you get people in front of the kids who can motivate the kids and who the kids care about. She fought tooth and nail to get this, and the union wouldn't even bring it to a vote. It wasn't even rejected. It was not even allowed to come to a vote. As the past head of the American Teachers Union said, I will start caring about the interests of children when children start paying union dues. Oh, I don't know how many teachers wrote to me and said, you don't understand, man. Okay, they didn't say man. They said, I spend a lot of time creating lesson plans. Lesson plans. This is like the magic spell word that everyone uses who's a teacher to explain why they only teach for about 2 3/4 hours a day. No, I'm doing my lesson plans. And I must say I have a little bit of trouble understanding what is meant by this. It's a very confusing thing. So you do go to Teachers College to learn how to teach, and I assume that you create some lesson plans and get them vetted by your teachers in Teachers College, right? So the professors in Teachers College must be teaching you how to do a lesson plan and what the best lessons plans are, which are validated and vetted by statistical analysis and, all that kind of stuff. You also know what you're going to be teaching, I assume. Study science and end up teaching the humanities. And so by the time you graduate and get a job, you should already have lesson plans. Now, if you don't have lesson plans, then what the hell are you doing creating them as a new teacher? I mean, you understand, that's insane. If you're a new teacher by definition, and you don't already have lesson plans that have been vetted by how well they work and so on, right? Best practices, then you damn well shouldn't be creating them, because it is absolutely unfair to experiment on children on something so important as education. Why are you creating lesson plans as a new teacher? Do you not know what works? Do you have no idea what works? Do you have no clue what's been proven to work? You should not be creating lesson plans if you're a new teacher. You should be using lesson plans that have been proven to work. Can you throw a little personal idiosyncrasy in? Sure. But you don't go to McDonald's, say, I want a Big Mac, and the McDonald's says, I'm sorry, we don't have any because we're still trying to figure out how to make them. It's like, no. There's already a recipe for a Big Mac. You don't need to do that. I did a search on Google. There are thousands of websites with literally thousands or tens of thousands of lesson plans available. That's pretty scary. That is pretty scary. Why the hell are there so many lesson plans? Is there nothing that has been proven to actually work? Is it just make up whatever shit you want, call it a lesson plan, and consider yourself an individual? And you understand, if you're making up your own lesson plan, how do you know if it's going to be the most effective way that you could spend your time in the classroom? How do you know it's the best way to teach kids? How do you know? Yeah, lesson plans is just something that people say that makes no sense to me whatsoever. If you're a new teacher, you should be using lesson plans already. If you're an experienced teacher, then you already know how to teach the subject. Maybe you make some notes, or maybe you found a slightly better way to improve it. But of course, if you have found the best way to teach history, then you should make sure it gets standardized as best you can, right? But this individuality stuff, I mean, it's really crappy. It's crappy for the kids. It's really crappy for the kids. And of course, if they move from one school to another, or even a new teacher comes along, how the hell is anyone supposed to know what's going on? You move to some new school where some teacher is working on their own individualized lesson plan, and there's no standardization. And where there's no standardization, there's no possibility of excellence. Where there's no standardization, there's no possibility of excellence. Quality is measurability. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If you can't manage it, you can't improve it. I mean, teachers resist standardization for a very simple and obvious reason. And not all teachers, right? A couple of good teachers out there, I'm sure. I never met them, but maybe there are. But teachers resist standardization because standardization means you can be measured, right? So if you are supposed to, on the fourth week, if your kids are supposed to know X, Y, and Z, then they can be tested whether they know X, Y, and Z. If you're following your own lesson plan, man, you're hiding, you're camouflaged, you're a chameleon in the undergrowth. we don't treat our children hugely well as a culture. Individuals do, but as a culture, we really don't treat our children that well. You know, we circumcise them, we yell at them, we sit them in front of TVs, we spank them. 90% of people hit their children. We yell at them, we are inconvenienced by them, we indoctrinate them, we teach them things that aren't true in order to maintain our own illusions. We send them to government schools, and then we complain about bullying and violence and sexual abuse from teachers, which is distressingly common in schools, and we complain that they just don't seem to have their heads on right. We complain a lot about our children. We fundamentally, we use our children. We use them, we dress them up in the family Sunday best to make them look good at church. We want them to do well in sports because that reflects well on us. We want them to be smart. We want them to be creative. We want them to be polite for us, for our shallow gene pool advertisements. We dress them up. We hit them, we yell at them, we prod them, we poke them, we lie to them and call it virtue. And we are neither apologetic nor humble about the world that we have created and given to them or force upon them. We are not apologetic for being involved in or supporting a system that has them hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to bankers and bondholders before they even draw their first breath. Or these terrible schools that we try and wedge these fiery rainbow disco ball creative monster fun brains into these tiny, tiny little squares of conformity and rote and repetition and memorization, and please raise your hand if you wish to go to the bathroom. These schools. We teach them that the greatest gods died for their sins. We topple these ancient, dusty, bloody crucifixes into their very cribs and say, you did that. And we praise a system of politics and we praise a system of democracy that has served them so badly. Our experience of the state and of political hierarchies when we're children is wretched, wretched. Because our first experience of the government is public schools. And they're terrible. They are unbelievably wretched compared to what could be. Especially with our technology, especially with the fact that, I don't know if you knew this, but 100 years ago, the average IQ of the average American was 67. Your great-grandparents were technically morons, according to the nomenclature of the time. It's 3% a decade. It's the Flynn effect. Kids are getting smarter and smarter and smarter, and we're still teaching them with these unholy, brain-deadening, Prussian-make troops and workers systems that were designed in over 200 years ago. And they just keep getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And we drug them with untested, off-label drugs. Nobody knows the long-term effects. There haven't been studies, and the ailments that they're supposed to treat do not show up on any medical test whatsoever. The ailments called independence and boredom. You know, sit down and watch some foreign language instructional film from 50 years ago and try to keep your attention on it. You can't do it. I can't do it. We all get bored. This is easier for us with mature brains than for children to pay attention in public school. But we use them. We use them. Children are the fluid that allows the grinding gears of adult conflicts to keep going on and on and on without ever coming to a head. We throw them to the teachers' unions so that we don't provoke conflicts with the teachers. We throw them at the bankers. We sell them off to the bankers so that we don't have to deal with entitlement spending in the here and now. We throw them overseas to kill and die so that we don't have to take on the military-industrial complex here at home. We throw them in prisons for nothing, for vegetation, because we don't want to take on a corrupt legal court and prison industrial complex here at home. Do you see? We use them. We stuff them into the cracks of a crumbling system. We drug them rather than make school interesting. We indoctrinate them rather than offend our Christian aunts and uncles. We drug them. We hit them rather than admit that we were frightened and bullied as children. We yell at them out of self-righteousness because we are not willing to accept and examine the catastrophes of our existing system. We blame them for laziness when they graduate to a true lunar landscape of economic and career possibilities. We indoctrinate them about college, and then watch them graduate tens of thousands of dollars in debt to near certain unemployment or underemployment. We use our children. If children were more people, do you see what I mean? They are more people than you and I. Society should be designed around the needs, preferences, and requirements of children, of free thought, of free minds, of free inquiry, of skepticism, of materialism, of rationalism, of philosophy. All children are born Socrates, and we use the Chinese foot-binding brain tortures of culture and superstition and hierarchy and indoctrination to turn them into Savonarola. Into Tertullian, who said, "I believe because it is absurd." This is what we have to offer our children. Believe in society because it is absurd. Respect your elders, although they are absurd. Listen to your priest, although he is absurd. Obey your teacher, although she is absurd, because she is absurd. And imagine what society would look like if we threw everything that we had inherited from the prehistory of our species out the window, and we designed and thought about society with the same amount of creativity and curiosity that we do with the next goddamn iPad. Just imagine if we did not allow these clanking, ball-busting chains of historical inevitability to slide down and slither around our necks like cold, revolting anacondas and strangle the life out of us and our future. What if we just swept everything aside and started with a completely blank slate? It can be done. It can be done. We don't have to orbit history forever. We don't have to accept that which we have inherited, which has been passed down through trauma, through violence, through spanking, through aggression, through abuse, through neglect, through abandonment, through indoctrination. We don't have to accept it. We can wipe the slate of culture clean and sit the hell down and say, what do the children need most? What do the children need most? That is the sun around which we should design the solar system of society. What do the children need most? Well, they need two parents. They need connection. They need peace. They need curiosity. They need good sense of humor. They need encouragement. They need negotiation. They need maturity. And we don't send them down to work in the kind of factories that were built in 1820. So why the hell are we sending them down to public schools that were invented at around the same time and have changed so little since? 200 years ago, what did you have? A little room with 30 kids in a row and a teacher with a blackboard. And the only damn thing that has changed is sometimes it's gone to a whiteboard. That's it. Everything else around society has unbelievably changed. We've gone from not being able to have a car to being able to fly to the moon and send probes to Jupiter's moons. But our educational system remains exactly the same. It's like a cyst. Violence forms around statist institutions and renders them immune fundamentally from change. Why do they have summers off? Because 100 years ago, 70% of people were involved in agriculture and needed to help in the summers. But now we still have it because nothing changes. Dear God, if Apple was a government agency, they'd be offering us not the iPad 4, but the Stone Tablet 1.01. These historical inevitabilities are completely mismatched with everything else that is going on in our society. These historical inheritances, the state, the church, public schools, taxation, all of these things were thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, evolved out of the most primitive and disgusting and repulsive and immoral human societies. Tribalism. The only thing that we have in common is we have a much gentler form of child sacrifice. But what if we just wiped all of that away, even if it was just in our minds, wiped it all away, and we said, what do the children need? Because if the children need it, given that they are pure and clear and clean and wonderful and have no weight of history, we come out of the womb with an umbilical, and that is cut. We don't come out with a full chain leading all the way back to the Stone Age that we have to drag around for the rest of our lives, all of these dead imaginary gods and all of these dead imaginary hierarchies and all of these dead imaginary indoctrinations. We don't come out of the womb that way. We come out of the womb in the present, pointed at the future, not chained and enslaved to the past, not lashed to a Titanic sinking into history, taking us with it. We come out of the womb like a rocket, like a springbok, ready to leap forward into the future, with no sense of history and no ties to the past. Free. But we have to be weighed down. We have to be chained up. We have to be tied up by the mafia burlap sack of indoctrination put over our head, our legs dunked into the concrete called culture, and down into the everlasting, ever-cold, ever-chill river we go. To join everyone else at the bottom of the river, bouncing around with our concrete feet, in the silhouettes of seaweed wrapped around our faces, holding out our drinks and pretending to talk about the fact that the heir of a successful murder clan's penis works, and hey, he's going to have a baby with someone named Kate. But we don't have to. We don't have to. Children are more people. They are the most people. They are what society should be designed around, what society should fold around. Like fog wraps itself around a statue, our conception of the needs of children should be central to everything that we think about, and everything that harms the interests of children we should be damn well ashamed of, and we should apologize for them, and we should have the humility to say, we let history screw us over. But you know what? It stops here.